Timothy Morton is a Texan-based philosopher and Rita Shea Guffey Chair in English at Rice University. They write prolifically, not least about and around the subject of object-oriented ontology, advocating for a radical rethink in the way humans conceive of the world and all that's in it, questioning binary definitions of the living and the non-living. Through this lens, the subject-object way of looking at the world, which is a foundation stone upon which Western thinking has been built for centuries, is essentially a master-slave relationship, and it's had its day.
Well, hello there, everybody. It's an honor to be here. And you see me here talking out of a fireplace that appears to have been designed by Mark Rothko. I'm actually looking into a camera that is on an exercise bike. You can take this as metaphorically as you want. I'm actually assuming that you might want to take it somewhat metaphorically because this is the week in which the Amazon rainforest has become a net carbon emitter rather than a net carbon sink. And when I found out about that a few days ago, I was deeply upset. I spend my life talking about deeply upsetting things, and perhaps it's appropriate to be talking out of this rather distressingly black hole-like fireplace, given the urgency of what's happening, and hopefully we don't get sucked in past the event horizon where we can't actually do anything to mitigate or even adapt to what's happening. I generally find that a healthy sort of state of dissociation is required to do my job. So if you see me smiling and making jokes or whatever, that's me cheering myself up. And I also feel like people like me talk a lot in the key of extremely negative and extremely scary and intense. And that often puts us all into shock mode. So I'm sort of going to try to avoid that despite how distressed I get about this stuff. So when I normally introduce myself, I say something like, hi, my name's Tim, I'm a philosopher, which sounds very much almost identical to, hi, my name's Tim, and I'm an alcoholic. And you're very welcome to laugh about that. You know, I actually wouldn't dare to have to ever describe myself as a philosopher until other people started to do it. And I think it's worth reflecting a little bit on what that word is and what it means. What it doesn't mean in any way is mansplainer. Unfortunately, that's what a lot of people who look like me take it to mean, and you're allowed to laugh at that as well. Actually, philosopher doesn't even mean someone who has ideas. Lots of people who start doing a philosophy degree think that philosophy is about having a big idea. I wonder where that comes from. And then comparing the size of their big idea to other people's big ideas. I wonder where that comes from. And, you know, when you look at the word philosophy, it doesn't have anything to do with ideas in it at all. The word philosophy is actually two emotions. The first emotion is love, and the second emotion is wisdom. I'm going to say wisdom is an emotion. You know, if you've got a choice between wisdom is an idea and wisdom is an emotion, I think you've got to go with it's an emotion. It's not specifically a set of programs for you to follow or handy hints or whatever. It's a feeling, right? The DOM part of the word is about a kind of feeling, like the word intelligence in a way is a feeling, in a way that the word intellect is not a feeling. And these are two words that are kind of together. And does it mean, you know, the love of wisdom? Does it mean wisdom in love? Does it mean love being wise? There's all kind of possible meanings of that, of this interesting word. And having ideas isn't one of them. Actually, in fact, it's almost about not having ideas. It's like you're kind of driving down the philosophy street, and the ideas are like the lampposts on either side, and you're trying to like not look too closely at the lampposts, otherwise you might hit something and get into an accident. So it kind of feels like that, you know, and you're sort of driving slower and slower the more you do it, until maybe you're even going at a very, very slow pace. And I love my old friend Jacques Derrida's advice, actually, to all his students, which is to decelerate, to slow down. And as human beings on this earth, we could really afford to do that right now, in particular as white males on this earth. And I'm hoping that you'll notice as I talk that one of the things I feel is foundational to any genuinely progressive ecological politics, or perhaps I should put it another way, to any meaningful ecological politics, is ending white supremacy and patriarchy. Those are not optional extras. Those are actually part of the program. They're logically prior, as we like to say, to any meaningful ecological project, because that's how we're actually going to get to have some solidarity with the non-human beings. And, you know, for me, Me Too and Black Lives Matter have arrived just in time. They're planet scale, human being, collective awareness and action, you know, arriving just in time. What do I mean by just in time? Because we're all talking about time. I mean the 2020s, right? We've got until 2030 to do something major about carbon emissions. It's like we've got a bath and the bath is almost full of water, and we need to switch those taps off so the bath doesn't come up any higher. And then we're going to let some of that water drain out through the overflow. The water is the carbon compounds. We got 10 years, guys, to do that. Why have we got 10 years? Well, this is two words. I'm going to say two words. And these two words are words that I'm going to say without trying quite hard not to burst into tears in the fetal position and hide in the fireplace for the rest of my lecture. Mass extinction. We're trying to avoid making too many life forms go extinct. When they go extinct, we go extinct. When we go extinct, they're going to go extinct. We're kind of interlinked with them in an intrinsic way. So, and it's on us, right? Like dolphins do not have the fingers with which to switch off the software that controls the oil pipes, right? This is on us. And it's also on us because we can understand it. Okay, there's two kinds of things to think about here. There's guilt and responsibility. Now, I live in Houston, and a couple of miles to the south of where I live are the people who are directly guilty, right? Like the people who run Exxon and so forth, and they lied to us, and they knew that global warming was happening and was very harmful, and they've sat on this information for over 50 years. And they're guilty. They need to be arrested and put in jail for something the equivalent of war crimes. On the other hand, we're all responsible to some degree, to the extent that we can understand it, right? All you need to be responsible for something is you understand it, right? Like you see a child running into the street, they're going to get hit by a car. You understand that they're going to get hit, so you're responsible for them, right? And the other good thing about responsibility is that it's not in the key of religion, which has caused some damage here, unfortunately. And it's also because it's modal. Guilt is kind of either guilty or not guilty, as they say in court. Whereas modal means there can be amounts of responsibility, right? So, you know, Pacific Islander, 0.00001% responsible, if that. American white man, 99.9% responsible for solving the problem here. So that's why I like to talk in terms of responsibility rather than guilt. And I hope that I don't make you feel guilty, but I encourage you to feel responsible and use your intelligence and your wisdom, which are actually emotions, to work with this problem. And here's another interesting thing about emotions. And this is another aspect of the time theme here, which is that, funnily enough, and I know this sounds odd, but emotions are from the future, right? Ideas are from the past, and emotions are from the future to this extent, right? Like, so why do you do therapy, right? It's because you're having a feeling and you don't know what that feeling is yet, right? Like the feeling is a sort of thought that hasn't happened yet, right? Whereas an idea, like I wrote this book called Hyperobjects, and it's got this fancy word hyperobject in to refer to things like global warming and COVID. An idea is like the receipt that kind of pops out of the cash register of the thinking or feeling process, right? So in a funny way, ideas are from the past, or ideas are the past, and feelings are the future. Feelings have a kind of uncertain, shifting quality. They're also in your body, yeah? There is part of our world that is actually the future, kind of right now, as it were. And that's to do with the sort of unknowable qualities of things, and the intuitive qualities of things, and the hidden qualities of things. And we desperately need to create some kinds of social structure, and actually, frankly, some kinds of urban architecture that have to do more with the future than with the past. And we're presented today with a very stark contrast between the future and the past. We live in a world which is mostly based on the past. If you think about a price of a commodity, the price reflects the past state, or all the past states of that commodity, right? Whereas We need a society that's more based, I feel, on creativity. If we're going to have an ecologically tuned world, we need a world that's based more on the future and less on the past. And when I say future, I don't mean a predictable future, because that's just building the past out over the cliff, right? What I mean is actually allowing things to be different, allowing the possibility that things can be different, that things can change. Because actually, funnily enough, impermanence is on our side here. I study Buddhism, and I'm quite a contemplative person. And one of the people I like to study says, actually, impermanence means you can heal. Impermanence doesn't mean entropy, like things decaying to nothing. Impermanence means you get the chance to heal, right? Thank goodness for impermanence. Otherwise, everything would be oil, oil, oil all the time. And, this kind of capitalism, I don't know whether we like capitalism or not, but this kind of capitalism is very automated. And in general, it's an extremely automated system that we find ourselves living inside. And, we could probably write the program for this system on a tiny little fortune cookie now. We could say that it's an adaptive AI. The machine learns how to extract life from the biosphere without stopping. And, there's no logical stopping point to these Mickey Mouse brooms. If you've seen this Sorcerer's Apprentice part of the film Fantasia, you'll know what I mean, where Mickey Mouse gets the broom to do the sweeping. And then there's 2 brooms, 4 brooms, 16 brooms, and so on. Suddenly there's millions of brooms and planet death, things that started good, right, ending up looking bad when you repeat them and when you magnify them, which kind of means like things that look okay at this scale, looking really not good at this scale, right? So for example, to go back to the alcoholism, you have a drink, it feels good. Then you have another one, so why not? I'm pretty disinhibited, I'm excited, I'm happy, that have another one. Feels good. Then a day later you wake up, you have a hangover. It wasn't so good. You build these things called cities, and you start this thing called Western civilization, and it looks good. In 10,000 BC, it looks really good, because you're storing your food, and there's some kind of mild global warming going on. Actually, it's called the Holocene, and all of your lunch just ran away, right? So you're storing stuff, and you're planning, and you're kind of dealing with that kind of situation. And 12,000 years later, the sick joke version of the last 12,000 years is that in order to avoid mild global warming, human beings created much worse global warming. And so, once this civilization thing gets planet scale, it's I hope you can see that it's very toxic, and we need to do something about it, change it. But actually, I'm here to tell you that maybe the change is too easy. Maybe people like me get paid to make it sound way, way too difficult. But maybe the point is actually it's too easy. Maybe it involves a couple of slight adjustments, but not very much, actually, funnily enough. So, for example, in Central America, where I live, central United States, if farmers were to take 10% of their farmland and just make it go wild, that would huge, massive benefit, right? Eating a lot less meat at an individual level, or hopefully none, going vegan is huge. Being careful about your food waste as an individual is huge. You can do things at all kinds of scales. My friend Colibri is an activist from Puerto Rico, and she's always arguing that the unit of political change is actually the neighborhood. That's a neglected scale for us to think about things. And she gets neighborhoods to sort of start to demand change in their little world, right? And these things kind of build up. And we need also global collective action, which is why Black Lives Matter and Me Too are fantastic, because first of all, ending patriarchy and white supremacy are key, and hopefully I'll get to that. But second of all, because they are transnational, global, planet scale, actually, political action and awareness. So they're potentially as big as transnational religion and global corporations. We need something else in that world, at that scale, to start doing some things for us. So I'm very happy that those movements exist. I'm doing everything I can to support them. In terms of thought, actually, white Western philosophy, I work within that tradition. I'm very opposed to cultural appropriation. But I have found, coming from, as I do, a deconstructive lineage, that kind of like in 2001, where Dave, the astronaut, is taking the little cassettes out of the mainframe computer HAL 9000. He doesn't have to take them all out. He just removes like a crucial 10 or 12 little cassettes there. They sort of pop out, and the computer starts to shut down and sing Daisy Daisy. It's a little bit like that with white Western philosophy. It's sort of like on very thin ice with all this weird subject-object stuff that it likes to talk about. And as my friend Denise Ferreira da Silva says, the author of a book called Towards a Global Idea of Race, any subject-object kind of duality always implies a master-slave duality. So I don't like to think of the world like that. I like to think of the world a little bit more like everything is kind of potentially sort of kind of a person in a way. I think that's better than thinking that it's a machine or just a block of matter. And I'm getting this from inside of white Western philosophy by just removing a couple of little pieces. And I think that's the responsible thing to do, and the right thing for someone like me to do. So we built these things called cities, and first of all, of course, we built these things called granaries to store the grain. And when I say we, I mean the Mesopotamian type people who were in Africa and East Asia and Latin America and North America and so on. Pretty much the same time, 10,000 BCE, built these little silos to contain the grain. And then they were sort of like, well, maybe we should live in those sorts of things, like the grain's living in this kind of thing. Let's us live in these things. We'll call them houses. And then maybe let's make a little silo of those silos. Let's group them together into a thing. We're going to call it a city. And we're going to put a wall around the city. And now we by definition, we've created a difference between the human being world and the non-human being world, right? And inside the human being world, what have we got? We've got human beings and their cattle. If you look at the word cattle in the dictionary, it means chattels, aka slaves. It can mean capital, as in property, capital, and resources, and it can also mean mucows and sheep and all that, right? These are all related concepts, and of course, very, very quickly after this, so sort of algorithm started to run of storing things and planning things and keeping things kind of like that. We got patriarchy very quickly. We got class division very quickly. We got racism very quickly, and therefore speciesism. Actually, speciesism, the hostility of a human being to non-human beings, and the idea that actually anthropocentrism, that human beings are somehow superior or fundamentally different from other life forms, is, I claim, coming out of racism, is coming out of white supremacy and coming out of patriarchy, is how that's born. And so then you have this distinction within the sort of human being social space between all kinds of beings. And then this gives rise to the distinction between the human beings and the non-human beings. And outside that wall, it's called nature, right? We think we know what that is. It's this thing that's outside over there somewhere, or maybe it's under my shirt, or maybe it's in my DNA, or maybe it's in my past, or maybe it's, but it's never like right actually here, which is why I'm very against the concept of nature, actually. I think we need to develop an ecology without nature in order to deal with the issues that we have today, that clinging to an idea of nature is only going to end in more misery. And the trouble with nature is that it's normative, which means that it has to be opposed to things that are not natural, right? Like this sexuality is not natural. This kind of way of being is not natural. It's an invidious concept that has nothing to do with evolution or symbiosis. I prefer to think of things as symbiotically linked. And I like to talk about the biosphere. And I have this phrase, the symbiotic real, to describe where we live, rather than saying nature, because I feel it's a degrading, violent term that only sort of serves to get in the way. And we've got much better words now, like biosphere, to kind of deal with what we have. Racism and patriarchy are not just feelings and attitudes, they're hardwired into social space. This is the lesson, for example, of critical race theory, which is coming under all kinds of absurd attack by people who don't even know what any of the words in that phrase mean in America. And in a funny way, they really should embrace it, because actually it's not about guilt, it's about responsibility. It's about realizing that no matter what your feelings are, your precious white man feelings, the structure that you're in is racist, right? So now you understand that, so you're responsible to change it. Yeah. And, you know, so it's not about making people feel terrible. It's about empowering people to realize that they live in a toxic structure that we have to do something about to change it. And again, I feel like this is how we get to the coral, right? This is how we get to the dolphins. This is how we get to become responsible members of the biosphere, by tackling white supremacy and patriarchy very directly. And that the sort of fullness of our world is something that we're alienated from, and that this fullness is actually the future. Yeah, it's not some kind of Garden of Eden. It's actually the future. We're alienated from the future in a funny way. And, you know, people like me like to be very cynical and sort of say, well, we're really paralyzed and there's nothing we can do. And ideology is everywhere. Maybe, yeah, correct, but that doesn't mean it's everything, right? It doesn't mean it's everything. Just because ideology is everywhere doesn't mean it's everything. See, the thing about the future is it's real, but it's invisible, right? Like the hidden shadow side of things is real, but it's invisible. I like to think that everything has a kind of underworld, right? Like this fireplace has an underworld. It's pretty clear. My shirt has an underworld. My nose has an underworld. Black hole has an underworld. The idea of black hole has an underworld. We discover these things in the West with art and poetry and music and so on, because we allow those things to like have an underworld, you know, and sort of speak to us about that underworld. And we can glimpse this underworld. It's not completely invisible. It's more like a sort of shimmery kind of mirage, you know, and it has this kind of flimsy quality to it that you almost don't think, oh, that's just nothing. But actually, in a way, it's far more powerful than any of the other kind of sclerotic, calcified structures that we see around us. We just have to kind of get used to it. In African philosophy, it's called the Kalonga. In the Congo philosophy, this means the bridge between the worlds, and it's made of water, and is identical to the hyperspace tunnel from Star Wars. It looks exactly like that. It's like the inside of a spiraling shell, and it connects dimensions together. And this is the future that I'm talking about. And it's sort of everywhere. We just have to sort of know how to get in there and find it. There's a beautiful children's novel that I love very much called The Subtle Knife by Philip Pullman. And it's about this kind of knife with a quantum scale blade. And you can use this blade to cut little slits in the world that you're in and open. Then you can go into another dimension. And this is the kind of, we need this subtle knife, metaphorically speaking. That's what we need right now. And I fully think that we can do it. I don't think that we're completely cut off. Otherwise, we wouldn't have these terrible feelings. And, you know, as feelings are from the future and ideas are from the past, I'm going to go with that. I wouldn't have written that book, Hyperobjects, anymore, because I believe we've all got the right feeling about it, right? We've got this hyperobject feeling, and it's called coronavirus. You know what that is. It's sort of, it's everywhere and it's nowhere. It's affecting this symposium right now. And, you know, 2 instances of COVID in maybe March of last year in Washington State on the west coast of the USA. And I just sort of thought, well, there's 2 instances, so it's on every single lamppost in the USA. My mum used to be a social worker, and she used to say, you know, if you can see 2 instances of abuse going on in the family that you're looking at, it's everywhere all the time. And I take this principle and apply it to the coronavirus, right? You can see little tiny things and it's everywhere. You know, it's the same with mass extinction, actually. It's very hard to see mass extinction precisely because it's so big, right? So scientists are developing this very interesting way of looking at little spectral, they literally call them specters, little traces of it. And the signal actually is not the sudden disappearance of life forms. It's unusual rarity, right? There's just too many of this kind of fish in this part of the, just a few too few of this kind of fish in this part of the ocean. That's the mass extinction signal. That's the spooky bit, right? There's just slightly too few. I'm reminded of the song by Talking Heads called The Overload, off my favorite Talking Heads album, Remain in Light. The first line, a terrible signal too weak to even recognize, kind of means 2 things, right? It's terrible because you can't tune into it right. It's terrible because it's absolutely terrible. Global warming is terrible. It's terrifying. It's terrifying. The next 100 years are going to be terrifying. And then there's another time scale on which it's horrifying, actually, because for the next 500 years, even if we do something about it, there's going to be all kinds of lingering effects of global warming. And then there's a scale that I call the petrifying time scale, because it literally has to do with rocks, and that's what petrifying means. It means being turned to stone, right? And 100,000 years from now, there'll be 25% of global warming effects still around in the climate, and those effects will slowly be being absorbed by igneous rocks. So we've got at least 3 big timescales to think about here on the table already. We've got the terrifying one, the horrifying one, and the petrifying one. The horrifying one is the one that makes you bristle. That's the Latin word horror. Means the little hairs on your body standing up, you know, because there's something horrifying, something creepy, you know. And we've just been through this year where there's been this kind of uncanny, creepy thing happening to us that is so different at different time scales. And we've all gotten used to thinking in terms of different scales, right? Like I'm going to quarantine for a few days and then, right? Or I'm going to wait for the vaccine, and that's not going to be until maybe, I was guessing that, you know, we would begin to start to get out of this in July 2021. That was in March 2020. I just kind of guessed based on my sort of thoughts about viruses and stuff. And lo and behold, right, but this idea that you're kind of waiting for various different things to happen. Waiting is not fun. You know, waiting is not fun. There's a very, very good definition of samsara. I study Buddhism, like I say. And one of my meditation teachers says, samsara is waiting for something to happen. Think about it. You're waiting for something to happen. You're already something is happening, which is that you're waiting for something to happen. But because you're waiting for something to happen, you're waiting for this other thing. And the hyperobject feeling, you know, the global warming feeling, the coronavirus feeling, in essence, is a feeling of waiting room. I did this exhibition in Barcelona at the CCCB a couple of years ago. The title was After the End of the World. And I was designing these waiting rooms because in between the art spaces, they wanted me to have waiting rooms where people had to wait before they went in to see the rest of the stuff, because they correctly figured that, you know, to use a fancy word, the phenomenology of global warming is waiting. I think it's absolutely right. Waiting for something to happen. And you know, this actually gives rise to this interesting question people keep asking: is it happening yet? Is it fully kicked in yet? You know, a related question: is this weather pattern a symptom of global warming? Okay, so these two questions are questions that need to be addressed. The feeling of "is this happening yet?" means it's happening now. That's the feeling, right? Like, if you've been in a car accident, I was in a car accident a couple of years ago, and when you're in one, there's a feeling of unreality. Like, is this even happening? You know, because your normal feeling of time has been suspended. Most times we confuse the measurement of time with time itself, and we live in such a regularized, automated world that we confuse it very easily. And so when it gets disrupted, we actually experience the real, actual time feel, as it were, which is much more this kind of queasy, kind of relative motion, sliding kind of feeling, like walking the wrong way up an escalator. You know, is this for real? Is this for real means it's for real. You know, as someone with some survivor issues, I can tell you, you know, when you're experiencing trauma, one of the first things that you're feeling is that this can't be real. That's the definition of being in trauma space, is this feeling of unreal. Okay, so we need to figure out how to tell people. Right now, you know this, right? That is this global warming means, yes, this is global warming, right? Same kind of related issue, you know, is this weather a symptom of global warming? In a way, this is a question that scientists shouldn't even be addressing. They shouldn't be even having a rapid response unit to address this, which is what I think they have right now, which is a unit that figures out very, very quickly the likelihood that this particular event was caused by global warming. In another way, it just is global warming, in the same way that, you know, you can say the grape is in the bunch of grapes. The bunch of grapes is climate. The grape is the weather. The weather is in the bunch of grapes. The coat is in the cupboard, right? The cupboard is the climate, the coat is the weather. The weather just happens in the climate. Of course, it's a symptom of global warming. Everything in our world right now, weather-wise, is a symptom of global warming because the globe is warming. Do you see what I mean? We have to get used to thinking on more than one scale at once, that's all. Climate is the same thing, only in a much bigger scale, right? Like a bunch of grapes is grapes, but at a much bigger scale. There's your individual grape. There's your little tiny bunch that you just had for breakfast. Because if you're me this morning, there's your big bunch of grapes that you left in the refrigerator for another day, right? So there's all these different scales of grapes, and we need to start thinking like that. You know, I really think there should be news that kind of dissolves the difference between news and current affairs. Because if you think about it, current affairs is really just news at a bigger time scale, right? Like current affairs is news that's like a time scale of weeks or months. And news is like hours or minutes or days, right? And so maybe the news could start off, the first 5 minutes could be the day, right? In the next 5 minutes, the week, then we do the month, then we do the year, then we do the decade, then we do the century, I'm not kidding, then we do the millennium, you know, then by the end of the half an hour, you're like, and meanwhile, in geological time, right? This would quite quickly get people used to ecological awareness, because truly, fundamentally, ecological awareness means being aware that things are happening on a number of different time and space scales at once, and that these scales are different. Things that happen mean different things on different scales. It's what we call scale variance, right? So for example, you know, you start your car, it's an internal combustion engine. You did nothing to the global climate. That ignition turn that you just did is statistically meaningless, right? Billions of those are strongly contributing to global warming. Both those sentences are true, right? We got to get used to that. We got to get used to the fact that the thing here that's happening here is this kind of true over here, and then at this scale, it's another kind of true. Yeah, both things are true. Got to get used to that. Got to get used to the fact that there's a kind of ambiguity in our world once you start to see things happening on different scales, that one action looks good on this scale, but really sucks on that scale, right? And you better believe that ecological politics means that you know very well that at some scale, your action is going to suck, right? You've got to make friends a little bit with hypocrisy, because, you know, just very superficially, if you're going to be nice to bunny rabbits, it means that you're not going to be nice to bunny rabbit predators, right? You can never get it absolutely right in the biosphere. And so the future world is going to feel like a whole bunch of failures and false starts, especially to us who are addicted to efficiency, which is an oil concept, actually. Efficiency is in the key of oil. If we're going to create an ecological society based on efficiency, I would like to beam back up to the non-existent Starship Enterprise, please, because I think it would create a control society much more toxic than the one we live in right now. We need to build one that's based on creativity, not efficiency. Because what do you call these things when you're doing all these false starts and you feel failed? And it's called creating something, right? You're doing a painting and it's not quite working and you have to do it again, and then you get an inspiration and then it doesn't work, and so on and so on. And I feel like the future world that we're about to enter, I'm hoping that we're starting to create, is going to feel to us like making prototypes and trying and failing and realizing that we can't perfectly succeed. But that's actually a much better, healthier place for us to be than to try to find kind of one size fits all, one solution to rule them all kind of issue, you know. And if you're feeling a kind of left-wing way, which I am, a socialist, communist type of a person, I feel that that kind of world actually will feel more like, if it's a genuine world, more like a kind of world of failures and false starts, aka a world based on creativity, aka a world based on the future rather than the past. So here's two different emotions to do with time, and time really is an emotion, right? Time is an emotion, guys. It's not the measurement of time. Time is not the measurement of time in the same way that, you know, my feet aren't the measurement of my feet. They're my feet. Time is a feeling, right? Very deeply, time is time feel, you know, and everything has a different kind of time, different kind of temporality, like we like to say. And there's all kinds of intersecting strange temporalities happening right now. And I think maybe one way to think about it would be to think about Shakespeare. Have you ever seen a late Shakespeare play, like The Tempest or Cymbeline? Because in those plays, there's very often a feeling. It's also in The Twelfth Night. I love Twelfth Night. Brilliant, beautiful play. Melancholic play. I'm a big fan of Melancholia. And in this play, The Tempest, for example, late Shakespeare, there's this feeling of intersecting times, right? What do I mean? Well, you've got the afternoon, to save the island. You got a couple of hours. Urgent problem you got to fix. On the other hand, you've got all the time in the world, right? That's what now feels like, doesn't it? All these intersecting times. It's this funny feeling that in Western art is mannerism, right? Of kind of different times bisecting each other all of a sudden, and becoming aware that different entities have different kinds of times. There's virus time, and there's human being time, and there's global warming time, and there's dolphin time, and there's capitalism time, and there's Tim doing this funny gesture time that he's not sure what it means time. Please laugh. So, given that, in terms of urban design, there's one enemy actually that we can easily identify, one enemy that is kind of getting rid of some of these time feelings. Yeah, I feel like the more different feelings of time we have, the more of a healthy world we're going to create, actually. And there's one word here, overkill. If you're a Freudian psychoanalyst, you're going to say death drive, but I like to say overkill. Overkill is a really good translation of death drive. And, you better believe that architecture loves to use overkill materials. In general, not progressive architecture, but just the way cities and towns are, for example, in the USA, there's a kind of default overkill. And my example for that would be the American lawn, right? The American lawn. We all think of ourselves as kind of sophisticated, diversity celebrating people on the whole. On the other hand, it's compulsory to have in front of your house a conformist from the 1950s called the lawn, a symbol of private property in public. Basically, everyone has to have their own Blenheim Palace kind of front part, which is just a whole bunch of grass in front of Blenheim Palace in Oxfordshire. Everyone has to have it because it's democracy. And, it's at the expense of other life forms, including human beings. Yeah, it's a white supremacy space. The lawn in University of Virginia, in front of Monticello, Jefferson's house, it was huge, and it was designed to give you a kind of false perspective that would obscure the slave quarters that were on the side of that house. And, being a Black person, stepping on someone's lawn in the USA often could mean you get shot dead, right? There are these laws called Make My Day. And people are allowed, if they see you stepping foot on the property, don't step on the grass, has real consequences. And lawns are white supremacy spaces. They're also very masculine spaces, I would argue, very patriarchal spaces where you have to have this kind of marine, kind of jarhead lawn size. And in some states, you can actually be arrested and fined for having the wrong size of grass. I believe the regulation height in Colorado used to be at least 1.75 inches. No psychedelic crucifixes, please. You've got to have this perfectly regular Barnett Newman style painting, kind of horizontal version in front of your house. And this represents, in the abstract, the privacy, but in public, you see. And in order to achieve it, of course, you have to destroy many, many life forms. You have to use a chemical called Roundup, which is the nephew of napalm and a major carcinogen. And you have to erase the grass with your lawnmower. And, the feeling of sitting in there, kind of contemplating your handiwork is a kind of toxic feeling, really. And that freshly mown grass smell that you like is, in fact, now we know plants have some kind of sentience, right? And the way grass communicates terror is the lovely, freshly mown grass smell, right? So next time you smell that, that's actually the grass kind of screaming because it got genocided. And on that cheery note, I'm going to finish my lecture. It's been a great honor to talk to you today. Thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to continuing the discussion. Thank you very much.